So, welcome to Monday Night with Ken Edmonds. You got John Albrecht here. Tonight's show, we're going to be talking about St. John and Halifax and what to do there. To get us started, John, why don't you go ahead and give me a little bit of information about your background, and then we can start talking about Halifax.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Central Ontario, but I went to school actually originally for kinesiology, human kinesthetics, but that was in Niagara Falls. So I got into the tourism business because, of course, Niagara Falls, it's Canada's largest tour destination, and got a summer job both at the wineries and doing tours of the falls themselves. I did eventually then go do my postgraduate in global travel and tourism. I've been lucky enough, my family travels quite often, and I'm an only child, so I spoiled rotten brat, and they brought me with them quite a bit. So I've been lucky enough to go to 28 different countries on 5 continents, and just got to finish off South America and Antarctica. But currently I work for a company called Seaside Tours out east in Eastern Canada, running tours of different cities out in Eastern Canada.
Okay, so we'll start with Halifax. And when we're talking about Halifax, and we want to talk, we'll start with a first-time visitor to Halifax. You know, they come in on a cruise ship, they get off the ship. What are some of the things that they should make sure they try to see while they're there?
So generally, the number one thing everyone wants to see in Halifax is Peggy's Cove. It's the most photographed lighthouse in the world. It's a big tourist attraction, beautiful. It's about 45 minutes south of Halifax itself, and there's plenty of different tours that'll get you there, whether you just want to do Peggy's Cove or incorporate it in a larger part of a larger tour, seeing other things along the way. It's a beautiful little seaside town. It only has about 30 year-round residents, but it has everything from little pop-up restaurants with lobster rolls to the mainstay restaurant there, the Sue Wester, of course, the iconic lighthouse, souvenir stores, pewter stores, and general guest information about Nova Scotia and the surrounding area as well. So that's generally the number one thing for new guest arrivals to Halifax I recommend to do. The second one I would say would be Citadel Hill National Historic Site, which is the giant British fort that's built right in the center of downtown Halifax. It is the most visited National Historic Site in Canada. Once again, you have plenty of options of how to get there. It's not too far from the cruise ship center, but it is an uphill walk the whole way. The Citadel, of course, was put on the highest point of the city for defensive reasons, of course. So it is a bit of a hike up, but once again, plenty of tours go there. Each year they have different interactive things to do. So, for example, this year at the Citadel Hill, they actually rebuilt part of Juno Beach from D-Day in the actual fort to show the part of Juno Beach. Hank's trying to walk on the computer here.
Yeah, Hank says he wants to be in the show. It's okay.
So showing part, or at least part of the beach that Canada actually fought for World War II. Along with different, it is the fourth installation of the actual fort there. So just showing how the fort has changed over the years, what some of the surrounding areas have been affected by that, and just some of the history behind the fort. And the one cool thing they do there every day, kind of as a tradition thing, is they always set off a noon cannon, because back before watches and clocks were easily accessible, that's how the people of Halifax actually told the time, is the cannonades up there would shoot off an 8 a.m. cannon, a noon cannon, a 5 p.m. cannon, and an 8 p.m. cannon, just so the surrounding people could actually tell what time it was. So they still do the noon cannon every day, rain or shine or snow, always goes off. And another thing to kind of round out, I would say, for first-time visitors is definitely the Boardwalk. Especially if you're coming in on a cruise ship, you basically exit right at the start of the Boardwalk. It goes right along the Halifax Harbor. The first place you'll go by is Pier 21, which is the Immigration Museum in Halifax. 1 in 5 Canadians can still trace their lineage back to that pier. And if you actually go there with a family member's name and the general date they arrived, they can actually search up what boat your family came across. It's almost the Ellis Island of Canada type idea. The second thing you walk by is the Seaport Market, which is the oldest continuously operated farmers market in Canada. It started in 1750, right down on the harbor. And it still operates today. It gives you great local food, drinks, souvenirs, restaurants right there. And then you'll continue on to the boardwalk right out onto the harbor, which goes through many more either mainstay restaurants as well as little pop-up restaurants during the summer to try poutine and anything else. Very Canadian. Beaver tails as well you can grab there. It takes you right by the Harbor Hopper, which is a little 1-hour tour that gives you a tour of the harbor as well as the city if you just want something quick and short. And of course, it does also go by Alexander Keith's Brewery, which is one of the more famous breweries in Canada, let alone Halifax as well. So I would say those would kind of round out the top. And the boardwalk itself does end at the Maritime Museum, which tells the history of both the Titanic, which just sank off the coast of Halifax, as well as the Halifax explosion, which to date is still the second largest man-made explosion in North America behind the atom bombs during World War I. So a lot of history there as well.
Okay, well, very cool. So now I've been there the first time I've done those. I'm coming back. What am I going to do this time?
So the next time, I would also recommend if you have the chance, rent a car and do some of the things that all of the next few things I'm going to mention are only about 45 minutes to an hour away from downtown Halifax driving. So all very close to go to. Number one is Lunenburg. It's a beautiful old city. Once again, right along the Atlantic Ocean, just very picturesque. The old part of the town has many little artisan shops, restaurants, really beautiful place to go. And it reminds you of the 17 and 1800s when you're in that old town there. They have a beautiful golf course just across the bay from the old town as well, if people are interested in golfing or getaways like that. Some of the best seafood in Atlantic Canada comes out of there as well. You also have, generally, depending on the time of year, you'll also have the Blue Nose 2 docked in the harbor of Lunenburg. So the Blue Nose, which if anyone ever comes to Canada, is the ship that's actually imprinted on the dime. It was a ship built in Nova Scotia, and it was the fastest ship of its time, won many, many races as well. And of course, Nova Scotia is very proud of that ship, and its replica, which is the Blue Nose 2, would be located in Lunenburg's harbor. Another great thing to do would be the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. Once again, about 45-minute drive to get to the close side of the valley, an hour to an hour and a half, if not more, if you wanted to try to do the whole drive, the whole thing. But Annapolis Valley is famous for its vineyards and orchards and fresh fruit and vegetables. So you're getting a lot of wineries, a lot of cideries, a lot of craft breweries along the way, along with farmers markets, a lot of fresh farm to table restaurant ideas along the way. So really good food and wine or food and drink tour if you wanted to do that. Once again, different tour operators offer multiple tours to both Lunenburg and the Annapolis Valley. And the last thing I would always suggest when coming out here is going to the Bay of Fundy. Specifically, I would say Burnt Coat Head, which is a provincial park here in Nova Scotia where you can see the world's highest tide. So the Bay of Fundy is famous for having the world's highest tides. From high to low tide at Burnt Coat, the difference is about 53 feet. So you can take a tour there at that park and actually walk on the seafloor. I did hear one tour operator was actually offering, depending on the day and when the tide was coming in, you could actually go out and have a lobster dinner on the seafloor as the tide was out, and hopefully finish it before the tide comes back in, of course. But
otherwise you're eating and running.
Yeah, exactly. But you also get very stunning views of the Bay of Fundy from the Nova Scotian side as well.
Okay, well, very good. So now, for accessible tours in Halifax, what are some of the places and things that someone that's traveling either with a walker, a scooter, or a wheelchair is able to get to and enjoy?
Yeah, so there are, like I said, multiple tour operators who accommodate people with walkers, scooters, wheelchairs up to a certain degree. Obviously, depending on the tour company, each one is different in their capabilities of how far or how much they can actually bring along with them. The city itself is built on a giant hill. So if you are trying to do it by yourself, it can be difficult if you have a walker or a wheelchair with you. But there are multiple tour operators, even the hop on, hop off bus. You can get on and they can get you up those hills and to all the destinations that you want to see. while you're here. And the general view out east is basically someone will do as much as they can. Like they'll bring their own car if they need to make sure you do get to see everything you want. So
I'm assuming Hank's back.
yeah, he's causing a ruckus again. He really loves to walk right across the keyboard, and I just
makes funny noises.
Yeah.
That's fine. So now go back to what you said early on. You said that right off the pier there's a boardwalk.
Yes.
And it sounded like there was a lot of level area, including all the way up to the Maritime Museum.
Yeah, so that whole boardwalk area is completely flat, if not downhill a little bit, heading towards the Maritime Museum. You're right along the harbor. You're not going to have too many ups and downs or any struggles there. If you want to head to the Citadel, that's where you're going to start your climb, heading up that way. But yeah, for the most part, the boardwalk's completely flat, and there are multiple options to get you up to the Citadel from whether it's taking a tour. Many tour buses will take you right up there, to even a taxi. Unfortunately, ride sharing hasn't made its way out to Halifax yet. Uber is apparently showing up this spring, but who knows? I think a few bylaws have to be passed here before that happens. So.
Okay. So from let's say somebody got a ride to the Citadel, which you said was the highest spot.
Yep.
How accessible is the Citadel?
So the Citadel is actually pretty accessible. The one big challenge is it is mostly gravel inside, not pavement. But because the cannons were so heavy, there's ramps everywhere to get up to the top level, as well as they do have an elevator to get up to the top level as well if you can't do a ramp upwards as well. So thankfully, because of how heavy the cannons were back then, lots of ramps, lots of easy access, especially to where those had to go. There would be a few areas that are stairs only, in saying that those lead to little gunpowder stores or anything like that, which they have those on the main level as well. So you don't necessarily have to see those either. But for the most part, for a building that was built originally in the 1700s, it's actually pretty accessible and pretty easy to get around.
Okay, very good. And then from the Citadel, I'm just thinking again, my wife travels with a wheelchair, and a lot of the people that will watch this will need help with mobility. Yep. So if somebody started at the Citadel, is the hill gradual enough that they could probably work their way down with a wheelchair, or are they going to need extra brakes?
I would say be careful in what road you choose. There are some that are a little bit more gradual, where, if they lost the grip on the wheelchair a little bit, it wouldn't, go running right off down into the harbor. There are a few, though, that are pretty steep still. But from the Citadel down, through the main tourist areas, you should be okay with your walk back. But I would have someone there on a few of those hills, though, just in case, because they do look pretty steep.
Yeah, and so if I'm with my wife, she's got me for brakes, plus she's got brakes on the chair, so. Unless she's made me really mad that day, she's safe.
Exactly.
If not, well, she might need a bath.
Yeah.
I'll catch that when I get home, I'm sure. Okay, so let's go to St. John. We're going to talk about St. John, right, or St. John's?
St. John. So this is the part that it happens all the time. It confuses a lot of people. There are two St. John or St. John's in Canada. The one we're talking about is in New Brunswick and has no S. The other one's in Newfoundland and has an apostrophe S at the end. So it happens quite often where we get tour bookings where they're like, hey, we're staying at this hotel. And it's like, hey, you're a 2.5-hour plane ride from us. I don't think we'll be able to get you there. But it does happen often. But this is St. John, New Brunswick, right on the Bay of Fundy. Beautiful little city with incredible architecture in its downtown, which they call Uptown. While you're there, if you're wondering, everyone will say, yeah, you're in Uptown. That is the St. John equivalent of a downtown of a city, but a beautiful, beautiful place to go. The architecture is really interesting because it's been ravaged by so many fires over the years. Uptown is a relatively small peninsula jetting out into the harbor, so there wasn't a lot of space to build on. Or of course, original houses there were built of wood, and the main heating source was wood or coal. So they had some pretty devastating fires. So all of Uptown now is basically built out of brick, stone, or concrete, which just gives a different feel because, of course, most East Coast cities in Canada are built with wood or siding because of the weather demands that are put on them each and every year. But no, for a first-time traveler going to St. John, the number one thing you'd have to look at, doesn't come close to anything else, is the Reversing Falls Rapids. So because of those large tides that I was mentioning earlier, even with Halifax, we're just kind of going to the other side of the bay here. There's a set of rapids on the St. John River, which of course at low tide, like any other river, flows out to the ocean. But during high tide, because that 28 feet of water is coming back in, it actually forces the water back upriver, makes the river flow the incorrect direction, and actually, almost like a page in a book, flips the rapids going the other direction then. So there's a change in six to 8 hours from the rapids going one way to then there's a short little period, what we call slack tide, where the rapids actually don't exist and everything is nice and calm for about 20 minutes. And that's actually when boats who aren't jet boats can go through the river. And then, of course, it'll flip to high tide, where the rapids are actually running the incorrect way upriver and forcing their way back up to Fredericton, which is about 90 kilometers away. And the river levels can even rise all the way up to Fredericton, depending on how big the tides are during that time. So there's multiple different ways of seeing the Reversing Falls Rapids, and depending on what portion of them you want to see, whether it's high tide, low tide, slack tide, I definitely recommend taking a look at the tide guides for the Bay of Fundy, because it does slightly change each and every day. It's about an hour later, but it's not exactly an hour later, and it's changing all year round for all of that. But no, some of the things to do and see, so you can take one of the sightseeing boats to the Reversing Falls Rapids, whether that be the jet boats, the sightseeing jet boat, the thrill ride jet boat, which will make you way more wet than the sightseeing one, of course, will. The sightseeing one's nice and calm and smooth and doesn't do anything crazy. Thrill ride one, the goal is to get people wet. They also have something there called the Skywalk. So that's actually a little glass peninsula that someone has built out over the rapids, where it has a glass floor and you can look down at the rapids down below. And they also have the Reversing Falls Rapids restaurant there as well. So you can actually have a meal right beside the rapids and enjoy them from there. And then there's a few, Rapids View Park as well has a great little viewing area. And Rapids View Park themselves actually have zip lines that go right up to the edge of the falls themselves for the thrill seekers who want to do that as well. And generally in the rapids, I would say about 60 to 80% of the time, you'll see seals hunting in there, because there's actually some quite big sea bass that swim through there most of the day. So at high tide, you have almost a guaranteed chance to see some harbor seals swimming through that area as well. So that's by far the number one thing I would say to do in the St. John area if you're a first-time visitor, is try to see that from as many angles as you can, because it is a really cool phenomenon. And the thing you can do is, go there for 20, 30 minutes, see it at low tide, go off, do something else, come back in a few hours. You can come see it at slack tide where it's nice and flat, go off, do something else, and then come back a third time. And each and every time it'll give you something different. It'll give you a different view. And it's really, really interesting to see how, gravity and Mother Nature can make such a change in such a short period of time.
Okay, yeah, and I remember we did see that when we were up on a Canada New England cruise. Yeah. And you're right, it is amazing to watch that river turn around and run the wrong way.
Yeah.
So what else? We've seen the rapids. We're going to come back and see them at a different stage a little later. Yeah. But in between, what are we going to do?
So the next thing I would say is definitely visit the Carlton Martello Tower. Once again, another British fortification. It was originally built for the War of 1812. So the last time that they thought the U.S. was going to invade Canada there, thankfully, they didn't see any of the fighting out that way. And it actually got used more as a fire spotter, because it's right across the harbor from Uptown, or the downtown that, of course, had quite a few fires there. So a great history there. Currently, it is under renovations. They did put a superstructure on top during World War II to look for German U-boats. because there were quite a few U-boats in the harbor back during World War II, and there are a few stories of how they landed spies actually in St. John as well during World War II. But they put a superstructure on top to look for that, and that's unfortunately crushing it from the roof down. So they've currently started renovations. They're hoping to be done in the next 2 years or so. So you can't currently go inside the Martello Tower, but the reason I recommend going there, it gives you a beautiful view not only of the uptown area of St. John. You get a beautiful panoramic view of the city. You can also see kind of the tail end of the Appalachian Mountains, the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains dying off in the distance that run, of course, from Georgia all the way up through Maine and finish off in New Brunswick there. But if you turn around and go look out the other side, you get a full view of the Bay of Fundy as well. And on nice clear days, you can see Nova Scotia straight across from you as well. And you just get beautiful panoramic, Instagram-worthy pictures from up there, along with a little bit of Canadian and British history, of course, as well.
Okay, number 3.
And the third one I would recommend is actually, once again, the City Market in St. John. It's a very, very cool place. It has a long history, started shortly after the Halifax one. And of course, it has a long history of being built and burning down because it is in Uptown. But the current version did not get lost in the Great Fire of St. John. So it has some beautiful architecture. St. John used to be famous for shipbuilding. So the most famous ship that ever came out of St. John would have been the Marco Polo at the time, which cut the journey from England to Australia down by about a month and a half. Wow. Which is pretty incredible at that time. But they actually, because of that shipbuilding history, they made the roof look like an upturned hull of a ship in the rafters and whatnot. And once again, you get a lot of local people who are making local art, local goods, local T-shirts for souvenirs, local food, and like any other market, you also have your classic delis and groceries and all that in there too, but quite a bit of local flair in the market. The nice thing about the market, it's only about 3 blocks from the cruise ship terminal, so it's not too far away. Once again, St. John is based on a hill, so it is a little bit of uphill walking to get there, but nothing too crazy. It's not too slanted. Once again, like we were kind of saying for Halifax, if you are in a wheelchair or walker, you can make it on your own. It's always probably good to have someone there, though, with you just in case. And once again, you have multiple tours taking you both to the market, to the Martello Tower, as well as to see the rapids. So you do have driving options as well. St. John's is not getting ride-sharing programs, so I don't think Uber or any of that's coming there anytime soon. So taxis would be the way to go. And generally, as you get to the cruise port, you'll have a lineup of taxis and anything if you wanted just right across the road waiting and ready to go for you. Okay,
so now let's say that I've been there and I've done all the basic stuff. I'm coming back. Yep. So what are some of the things I might want to add in? I'm thinking the Bay of Fundy, I may, in the reversing rapids might be worth a second visit, but what else might I want to do?
Yeah, for sure. So once again, you can either, for all of these options, you can either, once again, many companies have tours to go there. It is really easy though to rent a car. Once again, these ones are just going to be about, for the most part, 1 to 2 hours away from you. The first one I would say is St. Andrews. It's right near the border of New Brunswick and Maine. It's a beautiful little vacation village or summer village with many quaint little bed and breakfasts, homes like that. But the big thing to do there would be the whale watching out in the Bay of Fundy. So St. Andrews has a ton of companies that take you out, whether it's on a giant sailboat, or even on a quick little jet boat out to go see both humpback, minke whales, for the most part are the 2 main ones out there. And you do get to see seals along the way. This year in particular, there was actually a great white shark attack on a seal for one of the whale watching excursions as well. So we do get great white sharks up in the Bay of Fundy as well as up the coast of Nova Scotia. So you always get a chance to possibly see them with all the seals that are around as well. The second place I would recommend going, which is instead of going south towards Maine, is starting to head north. It's called St. Martin. And because of the drastic tides in the area of St. Martin, they've actually created some underwater and, depending on the tide, if it's low tide, above water caves that you can take little boat tours through and see those caves that have been carved out by the tides and get into them. And it's, once again, very, very picturesque to do that. And the third one I would say is Hopewell Cape. So it's most likely the most iconic area of the Bay of Fundy. It is a little bit farther away up the Fundy coast towards Moncton. It is going to be probably about a 2 to 2.5 hour drive, depending on which way you're going to take. The scenic route, of course, is the one that takes a little bit longer, that takes you through, Fundy National Park, as well as by Cape and Rage, and then up to the Hopewell Rocks, or Hopewell Cape, where you have the flower pot rocks that have been dug out over time. We're once again at all these, between Cape and Rage and Hopewell Rocks, you can go out kayaking. There's a zip line, depending on, of course, the tide. Once again, you can walk on the sea floor if that's something you're interested in. Take those pictures if it's low tide, again, with the flower pot rocks, and be actually in between them, right along, right on the sea floor there. It's just a gorgeous area where you can get some really great pictures as well. So the Hopewell Rocks and back was probably going to be a 5-6 hour excursion, though, if you're going to do it properly. So it's a little bit longer. Both St. Martin and St. Andrews, hour there, hour back, plus whatever else you're doing while you're there. So they're a little bit quicker and a little bit closer to St. John if you're interested in those.
Okay. All right. That sounds amazing. You know, a lot of what you can do, of course, is going to be determined by the cruise line's time in port.
Exactly.
You know, if you got a 12-hour port stop, you can do a lot. If you got a 3-hour port stop, you can't get much.
It limits you a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, John, I've really appreciated you being with us tonight. You've been a great guest. And again, you're with Seaside Tours. I'm going to put links in the comments down below, so that for those that are interested, you can check out their tours. They have several others. And in fact, John, I want to ask you to come back. Maybe we'll try to get a date set up in February, and we can talk about some of the other areas that you know so well.
Yeah, that'd be great. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right. And thanks for being here. And thanks all of you that are here in the audience.